in a particular context. So if you think about it, when we're talking about talent, talent has no inherent value. So, for example, you can have a great soccer player like David Beckham might be a fantastic soccer player, so you'd say he's very talented. But if you moved him into an accounting office, all the value of his talent would diminish down to zero, because I don't think he's particularly good at maths or accounting. So the concept of talent is that it's got to be a fit between the skills and the strengths that somebody has and the context in which they're operating. So the challenge from a talent management perspective is we're always trying to manage that fit. What is somebody good at? What do they need to be good at? What context are we putting them in? And what sort of demands does that place on the person? So that is a continual moving target, because although people don't necessarily develop very quickly, sometimes the context in which they're operating can change very quickly. So for example, right now, you look at the whole COVID issue, you could have somebody who previously, from an HR perspective, was always very active and transactional and was able to operate in an environment where they could go and see people. And now they're sitting at home and they're having to try and manage a mobile workforce, and it's a completely different set of skills. So as context changes, so we have to adapt the whole time to try and get a good fit between the strengths we've got and the strengths we need to be successful. Now, from an L&D perspective, there's various ways that learning and development has evolved over a period of time, from sort of same place, same time classrooms, into more kind of blended learning. And there's always been, and something that's got a major resurgence in terms of popularity, is the whole 70-20-10 concept in terms of learning, that it's experience, it's social learning and doing things and then training. But when we have a look at actually how people probably learn and change the most, in fact, even if you probably reflect back on your own learnings and things, you'll find that generally it's through actively doing something where you get some feedback, you can see that's something that you don't necessarily do well, you can see the impact that it's having. So the first part of it is you raise a kind of an awareness. I'm now aware of the fact that this is not something I'm good at. And you're made aware of it. Then the second part from a coaching point of view is I acknowledge that it's something that I'm doing that I could change. And then the third part of that is, okay, let's explore some options. What could I do differently? And then the fourth part is, how do I embed that as a sustainable change in my behavior? So it's really managing those four processes: awareness, acknowledgement, exploration, and then commitment to change. Now, within a business environment, it's very difficult to go and ask the finance manager to coach the people that he's supposed to be, that are working for him. It would be like saying, well, you're in HR, so why don't you build this bridge that this engineering company is doing? It's like, that's not my skill set. I wouldn't know where to start. It's not an area of competence for me. So it would literally be dangerous for me to try and build a bridge, because I don't have the engineering skills. And yet we go and ask managers all the time, well, won't you coach this person, because they need some help to become better at what they're doing. So we need to provide some way to accelerate the rate at which managers or individuals, whoever we choose, can actually provide good coaching advice, understand that sort of process, and mostly it's a question of them being able to manage the ecosystem in which that learning takes place. So if you have a look at a typical scenario of somebody going to the gym. So sometimes this has happened, you decide, okay, it's the 1st of January, I'm getting back on track. I just bought myself a rowing machine, which only arrived like 2 weeks after lockdown finished. But it's like, okay, I've now decided I'm aware of this thing, I need to become a little more fit. I put it there, and then I'm all excited about it. And then after 2 or 3 days, kind of the excitement vanishes, and then I just lose interest in the thing. So that ecosystem that I'm in, it needs to be able to maintain a level of motivation. So the first thing is, am I working on the right thing? Like, is the rowing machine the right thing for me to do? The second thing is, how do I actually motivate myself to continue doing this? Then an important part of that is am I doing it the right way? So I could actually be doing it, but I'm actually just embedding the wrong kind of behaviors and activities. And then the last part is, am I getting some recognition for the fact that, like, if I stand on the scale, I'm losing weight? Now, that same process kind of takes place when we're trying to coach somebody. They can start off, you have to start them off in the right direction. So what's the most useful thing? What's the optimum thing to focus on for this particular person? The second thing is being able to be clear around, okay, now that I know what it is that I should work on, what does success look like? What does the behavior look like? And then as you move through that as a coach, you need to be able to continually get feedback from the person, trying to understand, is this still relevant? Because sometimes we start down the wrong path. We think, oh, let's develop this. And then we actually find that's not the thing that we need to work on. You know, a typical thing that we often find is that we would say to a manager, you need to work on empowering other people because you've got too much work on your plate. So you need to actually delegate and empower other people to take action. Then we find out that the person actually doesn't have a problem with delegating. The reason they don't delegate is because the people that are working for them are not competent enough to do the work that they need to do. And so what ends up happening is delegation is not the problem. The manager needs to understand how to develop people first. Then they'll start to delegate. So sometimes we start in the wrong direction and then have to come back again. So what MyCoach does is it's basically an application that we've created to try and ensure that we can identify the most appropriate thing to work on, set some progress measures so we know what success looks like as going forward, and then set up a system to manage the whole process of understanding, is the person still motivated? Do they feel they're making progress? Do they think it's still relevant? And then still being able to understand whether that ecosystem that they're in is supporting them. So with that in mind, let me just run you through what MyCoach does briefly, and you can have a look at it. So here we go with the application. So when somebody signs up for with MyCoach, and we did build it as a mobile first application. So the idea is that the interaction with this is great over a phone. So I'm going to add a new skill so that we can start from scratch here. Now, what we've done is we have clustered the skills into 18 clusters so the person can kind of run through that and you can see, okay, what is it that I'm actually trying to do? Become a better negotiator, a better people manager, inspire people. So let me start with an effective negotiator. Each one of these there's 60 behavioral attributes or competencies that we've got underneath this. So if I select effective negotiator, I can go through and see what that is. So we've got acting confidently, diplomatically, managing negotiations, being politically astute. So I can then select one of these, let's pick manage negotiations, and we get a definition. I can say that's what I want to be doing. I can then, as part of a coaching process, it's really important to understand in terms of adult learning principles, if I don't think there's anything for me to develop, then I'm not going to develop it. It's that first part of, if I'm not aware of the fact that I'm not good at something, I won't develop it. So if somebody goes, all right, well, I've picked it, but I think I'm excellent at this. As a coach, we've got to go back and say, well, then why are you picking it? What does it look like? How sure are you that negotiation is something that you are good at? And we can start trying to modify that. And the second thing is trying to pick how long you're going to work on this thing for. And this is going to determine the feedback sequence. And then the last step is saying, how am I planning to measure this particular progress? So there's got to be a state of, I'm going to move from here to there. And this is where I see the gap between where I am and where I could be. From a behavioral point of view, so I'm going to say that how we're going to measure progress is that I'm seen as somebody who can ensure that both parties usually feel positive, that I arrive at outcomes that benefit both parties, and those are the two progress measures that I have. All right, so now I've got my my program set up. I know what I'm working on. You as a coach understand how well I think I do this. I know how long it's going to be, and I've got my two progress measures, and so I can submit that, and we can start with managing negotiations. Now, the first part of this is that I can then say, this is what we call a motivation log. So the idea with a motivation log is that you as a coach can get a sense of sort of an early warning system if the person is losing motivation in a particular direction. So when they do something, when they complete this survey, it's a simple, how do you think your development is going? If they say it's going great, that's fantastic. We get 100% on everything. If they later on come back and we ask them how they're doing and say, well, it's not so great, do you still feel it's the right attribute to develop now? So this is the issue around relevance. If I don't think I'm doing the right thing, then I'm going to be reluctant to do it. So I'm going to say, yeah, I'm still convinced I'm doing the right thing. Do you feel you're making progress? I'd say partly. And the last one, are you getting an opportunity to practice this? So these are three key drivers of motivation. I need to think it's something I think is relevant. It's something I feel I'm making progress and I'm getting closer to my goal, and I've got an opportunity to practice this. So as a coach, when you pick up a yes, no, partly here on relevancy, progress, or practice, you can immediately have the conversation with the person is, for example, around the practice, how are we going to find an opportunity for you to practice the skill that you've got? So I'm working on negotiation, but I don't have any opportunity to practice this. So as a coach, what you want to be able to do is flag it immediately and go, right, let's find some opportunities for you to practice your negotiating skills. The second part that we have a look at, so this is managing personal motivation about developing a specific competency. The second part is trying to understand, well, that's great that I'm going to do this, but I have no idea how to become better at negotiating. And so we have an approach that's called a rethink, react approach. And so we've identified a whole lot of actions that you can take that are very practical, that are very much focused on, when you consider the 70-20-10 kind of model, it's very much on the 70% side. It's the social learning, well, or the experience side of things. So we're picking things you can do. So you'll see here, there's a whole list of actions that you can go through. And the idea is I'm going to go through them and I'm going to say, this is something I'm going to start doing. And that's something I'm going to start doing. And that's something I'm going to start doing. And then once I've practiced that for a while, I can then mark it over and say, great, I've now done that. I think I've learned what I can from that. But there are a whole range of actions that you can talk through with the person as the coach. Now, the thing is that there's 60 competencies. There's probably about 15 to 20 development actions. So we're talking about probably close to like 1,800 suggestions on things to do. And that's important because, as I mentioned earlier, expecting one of us to build a bridge is the same as us expecting somebody to coach a person. They don't have the ability to understand what to do to make that happen. So these are some actions that can be taken, and you can track them over time. And if I go back there, you'll see the ones that I'm doing come to the top, and the ones that I can still do at the bottom. And then, because I've also set up some feedback, I've set up progress measures. I can send some invites to people. And these are people who are going to monitor my progress and give me feedback in terms of how I'm doing on this. So the question they're going to be asked is, how big is the gap between how well Martin currently does this and how well you think he can do it? Because what we're looking for is we're trying to determine the size of the gap between where I am and where I could be. So I'm going to say, I'm going to send Martin both of those, or send somebody both of those. And that will then set up a series of 5 emails that will go out on a schedule, and they will ask, and let me go and click on this one. Okay, so I've got my email. You can't see it, but let me just go and open the link. So I would get an email that says how do you think I'm doing? So this be, hi, so-and-so, I'm working on developing some new skills. How big is the gap between how well I do something now versus how well you think I could do it? So we're always trying to understand expectations when we're getting feedback. Okay? We used to have a process where the person would score the person on a scale of 1 to 10. But what we found was we would get bad feedback because people giving feedback would generally not want to give you low ratings because they'd feel bad about it. And then we couldn't see much of a gap. And often what would happen is somebody would get an 8 or a 9 the first time. And then once somebody started observing their behavior, they would go, actually, you're not as good as at that as I thought you were. And so they would score them lower. So it would look like the person actually got worse over a period of time before they got better. So this one is simply here, in your view, how big is the gap between how well I do this now and how well you think I could do it? Ensure both parties usually feel positive when the negotiation is over. I could say there's no gap here, a small gap, a moderate gap, large gap, or a significant gap. So I'm going to say there's a moderate gap that in other words, you've got some work to do on this. Arrive at outcomes that benefit both parties. I'm going to say I think there's a large gap. And that's it. That's all the person has to do to submit the feedback there. Okay. We don't have enough feedback right now to see what that looks like, but I can go into somebody's profile, and then you will see it move over time. So you can actually see what we're heading towards is a no gap scenario, which would mean that the person gets to 100%. So 100% is there's no gap between how well you do it now and how well I think you could do it. So that's the process for developing a particular competency. The other thing that we also get feedback on is the whole coaching experience. So how's your coaching experience going? Again, if it's going great, not an issue. If it's not so good, we want to have a look. Is it the relationship with your coach? Do you have sufficient resources, time? Are you getting the support from your manager? And then again, as a coach, that information becomes available to you so that you can track and monitor each of the people that you're working with. Okay. So let me just show you what we're looking at overall. So essentially what we're looking to do, let's share this again. Is we want to be managing the investment that gets made in a person. And that investment can be in time, money, effort, whatever it is. It's a question of identifying the person, making an investment of X, but then managing that investment to make sure you get a decent return. And a lot of the time we find that that investment is not managed particularly well. People develop the wrong thing, so it's not relevant. They don't get the support they need. They don't get an opportunity to practice, and there's a lack of visible progress, so they don't get the feedback they need to understand and motivate them to continue that change. And so what our focus is going to be here is to really try and make sure that we pick the right thing to work on. We can support them in the ecosystem that we create, that we ensure that there's an opportunity for them to practice these things, and that we measure the progress so that somebody feels like they're moving towards a particular goal. Yeah. So that's pretty much what MyCoach is about. 18 characteristics that you saw earlier on. We use a forced ranking methodology, and so you've got the opportunity to pick what you believe to be your top 6 characteristics. You can see the definition there, Siobhan, when I mouse over.
Yeah. Yes, yes.
Okay, so you get to pick your top 6, and then it'll remove those 6, and then you get to pick another 6, and you can submit that. That's your self-assessment. You can then also request endorsements from other people. So it's very, very easy. You can just if there are names there, you can just click request feedback. So it would probably be a good idea that we could load like the whole team in there so that it'd be easy for people to just say, okay, I want to get feedback from these people here. And then when you've got the feedback from people, you would have your talent analysis report. And let's just regenerate that. Download the report. And this report is also laid out in a way that allows you to kind of have a discussion as a coach. You literally just work through the report. We talk about how it was created and how to get the most out of it. And then here are some questions that you can ask yourself or discuss with your coach or manager. So like this, are there any surprises? Hopefully the way you see yourself is not significantly different to the way others see you. So we're looking at blind spots and hidden strengths. And as we go through the report, you'll see here, there's a hidden strength. Other people think that Brett's better at this than he thought he was. And you can find some possible blind spots down here. He thought he was fairly good at being a conflict confronter. Other people are saying that's not something he's good at. So that's the initial report. Something that would be useful, though, here is, as I said at the start, talent is a question of a match between, or a fit between the skills you've got and the context you're operating in. So each context requires a different set of skills. And so here, this part allows you to then compare your strengths to various situations. So for example, if you were having a look at saying, let me look at career options, you could see that people management and process administration are not great areas for Brett to pursue, but being a creative professional or moving into customer service or moving into a consulting or advisory space, that would be a better option for Brett. So this is showing you your strengths and how the feedback that you've got matches you to a career opportunity. And then for some of the guys that you're working with, if you have a look at advancing your career, you can see like being interviewed and getting a job, creating a professional network, tackling a new situation. So here, being interviewed and getting a job, that's something that the person could go, okay, well, why do I only have a 68% match on that one? And when you view the comparison, it will allow you to see which attributes are important for basically interviewing and getting a job. So obviously it's important that you're seen as somebody who's an energetic driver. In other words, consistently achieve results and meet targets, stick to a course of action. Another one that's important is that you can connect with people and build relationships. That usually that's how you get a job. And then you're a skilled communicator. So in other words, you can get your point across about what your strengths are. So if Brett had to work on something here and he looked at that and said, energetic driver, that's not something I seem to be very good at, I can drill down into it in a little bit more detail. I can answer these questions. And I might say, okay, maybe I'm not as good at that stuff as I thought I was. And that will then pinpoint the competency that I should work on. And you can see here, taking initiative or advancing my careers, achieving goals. Those are high development priorities. And it's from there that we then take it through and put the person into MyCoach. And then we would know taking initiative is the area that we need to work on. It's part of the energetic driver cluster.